Welcome to the Reasonable Christianity Podcast, a weekly podcast where you get to discover the truth claims, teachings, and practices of Christianity. Here's your host, Roland. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another special episode of the Reasonable Christianity Podcast. Now, with Human Rights Day coming up in South Africa, I thought it would be good for us to take a moment or just to reflect on the meaning of Human Rights Day, particularly in a local context, but also broadly speaking, just for us to ask the question, what are human rights? What do they actually entail? Why do humans have rights as opposed to other animals? We know that animals do have certain kind of rights, or people have ownership rights when it comes to animals. But as human beings, there's something special about us in that we are bestowed certain rights and responsibilities. Certain things are expected of us, and certain things are expected from us as human beings. And so I thought it would be good for us or insightful for us to consider this topic from a biblical perspective. So where are we going today? So today we are going to speak about three things. I'm going to categorize this episode in three sections. Firstly, we're going to just take a brief look at the origins of Human Rights Day in South Africa, which is the 21st of March. So we're going to look at the Sharpeville Massacre, just briefly. And then secondly, we're going to look at what moral values and duties are. So we're going to ask the question, why moral values and duties can only exist if God exists? Meaning, if there's no God, then my contention will be, or my argument will be, there can be no moral values or duties. And then finally, we will look at why human life is innately valuable. Okay, so let's look at the origin of human rights in South Africa. So when the Nationalist Party came into power in South Africa in 1948, the government legalized segregation, and after implementing the Native Laws Amendment Act of 1952, no black person could leave a rural area for an urban area without a permit. And this pass would be known as the Dom Pass. So on the 21st of March 1960, the Pan-Africanist Congress, or the PAC as we know it, organized a peaceful campaign for women, men, and children to gather in Sharpeville without their passes and present themselves for arrest. Now, approximately 10,000 people gathered outside a police station in Sharpeville Township to protest these pass laws. Now, despite the protest obviously being a non-violent protest, police opened fire on the crowd, killing 69 people and injuring an additional 180 victims, the majority of which were shot in the back because they were actually running away. They were fleeing the shooting. Now, when South Africa held its first democratic election in 1994, the newly elected president, Nelson Mandela, declared 21st March as Human Rights Day. So, let me start this podcast episode by asking a stupid, which should be an obvious question, or the answer should be obvious. When we think of the Sharpeville Massacre, these people being killed, protesting peacefully and then being killed or gunned down, many people being injured. When we think of the Sharpeville Massacre, was it right or was it wrong? I think we can all agree that what happened to the protesters during the Sharpeville Massacre was actually wrong. The question is, and this is the question I want to pose to you before I get deep into this conversation, I want you to think about this. Why was it wrong? It seems like an odd question, but I think the reason I'm asking this question will become more clear as we progress through the episode. So, why was the Sharpeville Massacre wrong? Was it wrong because we feel it was wrong? Or because some of us were personally affected? Maybe people were there. Maybe we have family members who lost someone that was there. Or was it objectively wrong? Was it wrong because we feel it was wrong? Or maybe because some of us personally were affected by the events? Maybe we lost a family member. Maybe we know a family member that lost someone they loved or they cared about. Or was it objectively wrong? This is the question I want to ask today. To put it another way, when we think about human rights, Are human rights a matter of opinion, or do humans have a certain value that is independent of opinion and perception? This is the question I want us to ask. And this is a very important question because we live in an increasingly relativistic society. Particularly now in South Africa, I think America has kind of hit its apex in this regard, and now they are slightly on a decline. But we as South Africa being a little bit behind America, looking to America for guidance and for direction in many aspects of our social, economic, and professional lives, we are a little bit behind America. So the question needs to be stated again. Are human rights a matter of opinion, or do humans have certain value independent of opinion and or perception? Now, if morality is simply a product of evolution, as some evolutionary biologists or atheists might contend, or if it's a product of cultural development, meaning that each culture has their own set of moral values and duties, the question must be asked, how can we justify the idea that certain actions are objectively right or objectively wrong? If it's only a matter of societal structures or biological necessities, how can we say that something is genuinely right, objectively right? Doesn't matter if it happens in Russia or America or South Africa or South America, or wrong, okay? So when we think about the atheist or the humanist view, and this is a view I see creeping up more frequently, and I don't even know that people are aware of it, because when I look at my small circle on social media, like Facebook, for example, I see this in the posts that people share. They become increasingly more relativistic. We see this, for example, in the LGBTQ movement, where if you tell them, look, what you guys are doing is wrong, homosexuality is wrong, transgenderism is wrong, they will sometimes make the argument that sounds a little bit like this. They will say, look, but we're not hurting anybody. Two men being together, they love one another. Why are we concerned with that? They are not hurting anyone else. So their being right or wrong is dependent on perception, on your position where you stand. From their point of view, what they are doing is right. From my point of view as a Christian, what they are doing might be wrong. So that's the humanist or atheist view of morality. So on this view, if morality is relative to the individual or the culture, this is called moral relativism. However, if morality is entirely relative, we need to ask this question, how can we condemn certain actions as being objectively wrong? For instance, let me ask the question for those of us living in South Africa. Why was apartheid wrong if morality is simply a product of cultural norms or a matter of opinion? Why was apartheid wrong? Think about that. Was it wrong because some people felt hard done by? They felt it inconvenienced their lives, or it benefited another group of people and it maybe discriminated against another group of people, or it had less than optimal consequences for another group of people, or it made them uncomfortable, or it just didn't feel good or didn't feel right? Or was apartheid wrong because it violated a greater law, a greater reality? Okay? So, when you speak to humanists, and I'm sad to say the last conversation I had with my brother, or one of my brothers, in terms of his ways, in terms of his belief system, it leans toward this kind of humanistic belief system where it's all about loving one another. You know, like the hippies used to be. Come on, man, peace. Make peace, not war. Let's just love one another. Let's just be there for one another. And all these sayings or attitudes have this kind of subjective connotation to it. As long as we live peacefully with one another, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what I do, as long as it doesn't conflict with one another. So I can do whatever I want to do as long as it makes me happy. But if morality is based on human well-being, we need to ask the question, how do we determine what constitutes well-being? Is it happiness? Is it fulfillment? Or is it something else entirely? And who gets to decide what constitutes well-being, what constitutes happiness? Because an adult human male might have a proclivity or an attraction to underage girls, and that makes him happy. Who are we to go in and tell him he's wrong for wanting to have sex with underage girls? I mean, it's a part of his well-being. It makes him happy. How can we justly or justifiably step in and say, no, we are not going to allow this because you are wrong? What gives us the basis for making that contention? Also, if morality is just a societal construct, how can we account for the universal norms that we see across different cultures and societies? Now, obviously, cultures differ sometimes in a small sense, sometimes on a large scale. But there are certain common values that all cultures share. For example, all cultures have the innate idea that it's not a good thing, it's not right to torture babies for fun. You might have cultures that would torture babies. They might sacrifice those babies to idols, to gods or whatever. They might burn those babies because they believe that would bring some kind of reciprocity from their gods, like rain, for example. But they would not do it for fun. They would not condone torturing babies or sacrificing babies simply because it's fun. Now, this is a harsh and a disgusting example, but I think it makes my point. To say that there are certain norms and values that we find like a common thread throughout history, throughout different cultures, which indicate a kind of common source for our shared morality. And the Christian belief is that this common thread, this common standard for morality is found in the nature of God. So if morality is grounded in God, then we have a basis for objective moral values. Why? Because if God is a perfectly moral being, then certain actions are objectively right or they are objectively wrong because they align with or contradict the nature of God. Then God is the standard of morality. God is the standard of right and wrong. God determines by his very nature what is valuable, what is good, what is perfect. And this is where philosophers brought in what is known as the moral argument. I'm going to lay out the argument for you really quickly. I'm not going to go into detail into each premise of the argument because I did cover this in a previous episode. If you want to see how this argument is presented and defended, you can go to the Reasonable Christianity podcast, season 1, episode 7, and listen to that episode where I go a little bit more into detail by focusing or zeroing in on each of the three premises. But the moral argument goes like this. It says, objective moral values can only exist if there is a divine moral lawgiver. The argument goes like this. Every law has a lawgiver. So as human beings in our experience, whenever we encounter a law, when we trace that law back to its origin, it always goes back to a moral lawgiver. Someone needs to give the law. When you have regulations, you have to have a regulator. Okay? Premise number 2. There is a moral law. So first premise says, every law has a lawgiver. Second premise says there is a moral law, and when we look at our experience as human beings throughout history, across different cultures, across different contexts, we see that there is a moral law. There are certain values and norms and duties that is shared among different cultures, among different eras. Then the conclusion says, therefore, there is a moral lawgiver. Now, as with every other sound philosophical argument, the conclusion is necessarily true if the first and second premises are true. Now, like I said, I'm not going to defend the premises in this episode. You can go to Reasonable Christianity Season 1, Episode 7 to get a full argument or a defense for this argument. Now, at this point, I think it's important for us to make a distinction between moral values and moral duties. Firstly, according to William Lane Craig, when we speak of moral values, we're talking about whether something is good or bad. However, when we speak about moral duties, we are concerned with whether something is right or wrong. Now, obviously, for us, particularly coming from a developing educational system, for us, it's not that easy to make the distinction. So it might be apt to equate what is right with what is good and what is wrong with what is bad. But we need to know that these things are strictly speaking, they are not the same thing. What is good isn't the same as what is right, and what is bad is not the same as what is wrong. Dr. Lane Craig goes even further by saying, right and wrong have to do with moral obligation, what we ought to do. But obviously, I'm not obligated to do something just because it is good for me to do it. So, for example, it is good to become a school teacher. However, this doesn't mean that it is my duty to become a school teacher. Okay? Also, there are some instances where doing what is good might actually conflict with doing what is right. And I like to use this example. Say, for example, someone breaks into my house. The person holds me at gunpoint and asks me who else is in the house. Now, should I tell the robber that my wife and kids are also in the house, thereby obviously risking their lives? No, of course not. I have no moral obligation towards the robber, to be honest. Honesty is a moral value. It's good to be honest. But the right thing to do in that situation is to protect the lives of my family. So I have no moral duty towards the robber, to be honest. Okay? That's just to show the distinction between a moral value, something that is good, versus a moral duty, something that is right, the right thing to do. Sometimes doing the right thing requires us to violate what is good. Okay? Then we also need to distinguish between subjective and objective moral values and duties. So, to say something is objective, or to say that there are objective moral values and duties, is to say that there is good or bad, or there is right and wrong, independent of human preference or perception. This is the contention we are making. We are saying that in the world, as we experience this, there are certain things that are right, and there are certain things that are wrong, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. For example, when we say the Holocaust, meaning the Nazis that killing millions of Jews, was objectively wrong, we are saying it was wrong even though the Nazis who did it thought that what they were doing was right. It would still have been wrong even if the Nazis won World War II. Why? Because it is objectively wrong. Okay? So then, and this is the crux of the matter, if there is no God, there is no moral law, no universal law that applies to all of us. And if there is no moral law, there can be no human rights. Okay? Let's refer to the American Declaration of Independence. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So the founders of America believed that human rights are God-given, and as such they are universal and absolute. These rights apply to all people, all places, always. This is why the Allied nations could convict the Nazis at Nuremberg, because human rights are universal. And they are universal because they are rooted in the essence of what it means to be human. So, to reiterate, without the moral law, we couldn't even know justice or injustice. If there are no objective human rights, then there can be no objective justice or injustice. So one of the objections I often hear people raise when it comes to Christianity or the existence of God is the presence of evil and suffering in the world. They would object like this. For example, they would say, if there really is a good and just God, then why does he allow bad things to happen to good people? But C.S. Lewis counters his arguments perfectly by saying the following. He says, when he was an atheist, "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? So you can't call something wrong unless you have some kind of idea of what right is. If there is no objective moral law, there is no God. And if there is no God, then there can be no justice. Everything then is a matter of opinion. God is the standard for absolute goodness, absolute righteousness. God is the standard for what is right, good, and beautiful. So anything that falls short of that standard or violates that standard is bad or wrong or sin, if you want to use that word. If there's no God to be the standard apart or outside of ourselves, then there can be no objective right and wrong. Everything that we do then is only a matter of opinion. Okay, let's consider human rights. So what makes human rights important? Or to put it like this, what makes human beings valuable enough that we ought to protect their dignity? The answer is simple. Human beings were made in the image of God. Let's look at Genesis 1 verse 26 to 27. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every crawling thing that crawls on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Psalm 139 verse 13 says, "For you created my innermost parts. You wove me in my mother's womb." So the thing that makes human beings valuable or special is the fact that we were made in the image of God. However, unfortunately, we live in a fallen world. Romans 3 verse 23 says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." Glory meaning the character and the ultimate purposes of God. But Jesus came to change all this. Galatians 3 verse 27 to 28 says, "For all of you were baptized into Christ, having clothed yourself with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." Now obviously this is not speaking about functional properties. It's speaking about value. In the ancient world, a Greek would be worth more than a Jew. A free man would be worth more than a slave, or would have more value than a slave. A male would have more value than a female. But in Christ Jesus, Jesus reconciled the world to himself again and returned us or restored us to the original purpose of God's design for the universe, which is that as human beings we are his image bearers, and as such we have an unmeasurable worth, because God is unmeasurably worthy. We are made in his image. This is why abortion is wrong. I had a conversation with one of my friends, my mentor actually, and we were speaking about abortion. And I said to him that abortion is murder. And I remember the Bible does not condemn killing. Killing, meaning taking a human life, can be justified. However, the Bible does condemn murder, which is the unjustifiable killing of a human being, or unjustified killing of a human being. Unjustifiably taking a human being's life. Taking a human being's life without just cause. That's what abortion is. Abortion is killing a human being simply in many times to make your life easier. That's why abortion is wrong. It's wrong because you are killing a human. And that human was made in the image of God. And as such, that human has an innate value. But what we see now is, sadly, we live in a world where a person's value is defined by external factors like their family orientation, their sexual orientation, how much money they have, what their culture is, which side of the town they live in. No, a human being's value is defined by its nature. We are by nature valuable because we are made in the image of God. This is why racism is wrong. Because part of the way God made us was for us to be different in terms of our ethnicity. This is why LGBTQ ideology is wrong. Because when God decided to make us in his image, he decided to make us male and female. And being male and female incorporates certain properties in the way we should live our lives. The way we give expression as male and the way we give expression as female to the image of God has important significance for glorifying God in the earth. And this is why LGBTQ ideology is wrong, because it violates the nature of God. This is why murder and rape is wrong again. This is why apartheid in the Holocaust was wrong, because those events, those institutions, those ideologies violated the nature of human beings, and as such violated the nature of God, because all human value is derived from the fact that we as human beings were made in the image of God, and because of that, we are by our very nature valuable and endowed with rights and duties. Not gonna speak about duties now, but rights that correspond to the nature and character of our Creator. Thank you guys for listening. That's all from my side today. I just wanted to impress this on us today, that as human beings, we should respect and love and value one another simply because we are human beings. Our possessions, our status, our money, our socioeconomic situation does not define our value or determine our value. Our value is determined by the fact that we are human beings. Sometimes atheists might make the argument that a human being's value, what makes us human, and many people that are activists and proponents of abortion would use this argument as well. They would say what makes us human is our relationships, it's our memory, it's our consciousness. So if a person is not conscious, doesn't have relationships, or doesn't have memory, then they are no longer human. And then I watched a video by Ben Shapiro where he makes the argument that, what about a person that's in a coma, or a person that's suffering from severe dementia? He does not have the cognitive capacity to form relationships or to retain his memory. He's barely, even if you are in a coma, you are barely even conscious. Does that mean you are no longer human? Of course not. You are human because that's how God made you. You are made in the image of God. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you guys found this to be insightful and helpful. As always, until the next time, remember the truth matters. You are valuable. The truth matters. And so do you.